"You fucking liar, Jimmy," said Ben Affleck harshly, his voice slicing through the air like a blade, raw with betrayal, his eyes burning with a fury that could ignite a room. Truth, that fragile thing, had been twisted, warped, and thrown to the wolves by a man he once called a friend. Trust, a bond forged over years of shared laughs and late-night confessions, now lay shattered on the polished floor of a live television stage, where every word was a weapon and every glance a wound. What is loyalty when a man can smile to your face while plunging a knife into your back? What is friendship when it's sold for a cheap laugh and a spike in ratings? The crowd, packed tight in the studio, held its breath, sensing the storm, brewing between two giants of Hollywood, their history unraveling in real time. This wasn't just a debate. This was personal. Ben leaned forward in his chair, fists clenched, his jaw tight as he glared at Jimmy Kimmel, who sat behind his sleek desk, smirking like a fox caught with feathers in its mouth. The topic had started innocently enough, a discussion about Hollywood's unspoken rules, the kind of thing late-night shows thrived on. But Jimmy, with his sharp tongue and sharper ambition, had veered into dangerous territory. He'd brought up a story from years ago, one Ben had shared in confidence over whiskey and regrets. A story about a low point in Ben's career when he'd turned down a role that could have changed everything. It was a moment of vulnerability, a secret Ben had trusted Jimmy to keep buried. But tonight, Jimmy had dug it up, polished it with a cruel twist, and served it to the world with a grin. "You think you can just drag that out and make it a punchline?" Ben said, his voice low, trembling with rage. "You know what that time was like for me. You were there, Jimmy. You saw me at my worst, and now you're using it to score points?" The audience gasped, the air thick with unease. Jimmy's smirk faltered, but only for a second. He leaned back, crossing his arms, his eyes glinting with defiance. "Oh, come on, Ben, it's just a show," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "People love a good story. Don't take it so personally." The crowd murmured, some cheering Jimmy's jab, others shifting uncomfortably, caught in the crossfire of a friendship imploding. Ben's face darkened, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. "Just a show?" he spat. "You think you can hide behind that excuse? You knew exactly what you were doing. You wanted a moment, didn't you? A viral clip to keep your name in the headlines. You're not a friend. You're a vulture." The accusation hung heavy, the studio silent except for the faint hum of cameras capturing every second. Jimmy's eyes narrowed, his charm cracking like thin ice. He leaned forward, his voice sharp now, no longer playing for laughs. "You're calling me a vulture? Look at you, Ben, sitting there like some wounded hero. You're not exactly innocent. In this town, are you?" The crowd erupted, some shouting, others whispering as the tension spiked, a live wire sparking between the two men. Ben shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You want to talk about innocence?" he roared, pointing a finger at Jimmy. "You've been playing dirty for years, twisting people's words, selling out anyone for a laugh. I trusted you, and you betrayed me." The audience was on edge, some clapping, others frozen, as Ben's raw anger filled the room. Jimmy stood too, his face flushed, his cool demeanor gone. "You trusted me," he snapped back. "Maybe you should have trusted yourself not to spill your sob stories to half of Hollywood." The crowd roared, the energy chaotic, as the two men faced off, years of friendship crumbling under the weight of resentment and ambition. Ben Affleck stood towering over the desk, his chest heaving, eyes locked on Jimmy Kimmel like a predator sizing up its prey. The studio audience was a sea of wide eyes and open mouths, their cheers and gasps fueling the chaos. Jimmy, refusing to back down, stepped out from behind his desk, his usual swagger replaced by a brittle edge, like a man who knew he'd crossed a line but was too stubborn to retreat. "You want to make this a spectacle, Ben?" he hissed, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Go ahead, play the victim. Tell everyone how I ruined your precious little secret." The crowd buzzed, some booing, others egging him on as the air crackled with hostility. "Victim?" Ben barked, his laugh bitter and cold. "You think I'm crying over this? I'm calling you out because you're a snake, Jimmy. You act like everyone's buddy, but you'll sell anyone out for a ratings bump." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "I told you that story because I thought you were a friend. I was wrong." The audience fell silent, the weight of Ben's words sinking in. He wasn't just angry, he was wounded, his trust shattered by a man he'd once confided in during dark days. Jimmy's face twisted, his eyes flashing with defiance. He jabbed a finger at Ben, his voice rising to match the fury. "Don't stand there acting all high and mighty, Affleck. You've played the game too. You think I don't know the deals you've made, the people you've stepped over? You're no saint." The accusation stung, and Ben's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. The crowd murmured, sensing blood in the water as Jimmy pushed harder. "You told me that story because you wanted sympathy," he sneered. "Don't pretend it was some sacred bond. You're just mad the world knows you're not perfect." Ben's eyes narrowed, his voice a low rumble. "You're twisting this, just like you twist everything. That story wasn't yours to tell. It was about the time I hit rock bottom, when I doubted every choice I made. You were there, Jimmy. You saw me struggle. And now you're using it to make yourself look clever." He turned to the audience, his voice raw but steady. "This guy builds his whole career on tearing people down, and I'm done letting him get away with it." The crowd erupted, some cheering for Ben, others shouting Jimmy's name, the room a powder keg ready to explode. Jimmy laughed, but it was hollow, his confidence fraying. "You're done with me?" he shot back, stepping closer until they were inches apart. "You need me, Ben. This show's the only place people still care about you. Without me, you're just another washed-up actor with a sad story." The words were venom, meant to wound, and they hit hard. Ben's face flushed, his restraint slipping as he grabbed the edge of Jimmy's desk, leaning in close. "Say that again," he growled, his voice shaking with rage. "Call me washed up one more time, and I'll show you what I'm made of." The audience roared, the tension electric, as producers scrambled backstage, whispering frantically into headsets, unsure how to contain the wildfire spreading before them. The studio was a furnace, the air thick with the heat of Ben Affleck's fury and Jimmy Kimmel's defiance, their voices clashing like steel on steel. Ben's hand gripped the edge of Jimmy's desk, his knuckles pale, his eyes boring into the host, who stood his ground, chin raised, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You think you can bully me on my own stage?" Jimmy snapped, his voice sharp and mocking, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. "You're out of your depth, Affleck. Sit down before you make a bigger fool of yourself." The crowd roared, some chanting Ben's name, others jeering, their divided loyalties stoking the fire. Ben didn't flinch, his voice a low, dangerous snarl. "Bully you? You're the one who stabbed me in the back, Jimmy. You took a piece of my life, something I trusted you with, and turned it into a cheap gag." He straightened, towering over the desk, his presence commanding the room. "You don't get to play the victim here. You're a coward who hides behind jokes." The audience gasped, the accusation cutting deep, and a few clapped, drawn to Ben's raw honesty. Jimmy's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl, his hands balling into fists, at his sides. "You want to talk about cowards?" Jimmy fired back, his voice rising, sharp as a whip. "You've been running from your failures for years, Ben. That story I told? It's not just yours. This town knows you turned down that role because you were scared. Scared you'd flop. Scared you'd never be good enough. I just said what everyone's thinking." The crowd erupted, some shouting in support, others booing Jimmy's cruelty. Ben's face twitched, the words landing like a punch, but he didn't back down. He stepped around the desk, closing the gap between them, his voice steady but laced with venom. You don't know a damn thing about fear, Jimmy. You've never risked anything. You just tear people apart to feel big. The tension was unbearable, the audience hanging on every word. Their cheers and jeers a chaotic backdrop. Producers hovered at the stage's edge, one gesturing wildly to cut to commercial, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing the raw spectacle. Jimmy's eyes darted to the crowd, then back to Ben, his confidence cracking under the weight of the confrontation. "You're pathetic," he spat, his voice shaking now, betraying his bravado. "You think you can walk in here and shame me? I made you relevant again. You should be thanking me." The crowd gasped, the audacity of the claim igniting a new wave of noise, some fans shouting insults at Jimmy, others egging him on. Ben's laugh was cold, cutting through the clamor. "Thank you? For dragging my name through the mud? You're not some kingmaker, Jimmy. You're a parasite, feeding off other people's pain." He turned to the audience, his voice rising, raw with conviction. "This guy's built his whole career on betrayal, and I'm not letting him get away with it anymore." The crowd exploded, the energy seismic, as Ben's words struck a chord. Jimmy's face reddened, his control slipping, and he lunged forward, jabbing a finger at Ben. "Get off my stage," he growled, his voice hoarse with desperation. "You're done here." Ben didn't move, his eyes locked on Jimmy, a storm ready to break. Ben Affleck stood rooted to the spot, his eyes blazing, unmoved by Jimmy Kimmel's desperate command to leave the stage. The audience was a roaring tide, their shouts and cheers crashing like waves, some urging Ben to stay, others taunting Jimmy, who stood trembling with rage, his fingers still pointed like a shaky accusation. "You think you can kick me out?" Ben said, his voice a low, steady growl that silenced the room. "You don't get to control this, Jimmy. Not anymore." The crowd erupted, their energy a living thing, feeding off Ben's defiance as he took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. Jimmy's face twisted, his composure unraveling like a cheap suit. "You're nothing without me," he spat, his voice cracking under the strain. "This show gave you a platform when everyone else forgot you. You owe me, Affleck." The words were a desperate swing, meant to wound, but they only fueled Ben's fire. He leaned in, his voice cold and cutting. "I owe you? For what? For turning my pain into your cheap entertainment? You're not my savior, Jimmy. You're a leech, and I'm done letting you feed off me." The audience gasped, then roared, some leaping to their feet, their applause shaking the studio as Jimmy's eyes widened, his bravado crumbling. "You're full of it," Jimmy hissed, his hands shaking as he stepped back, nearly tripping over a chair. "You think you're some big hero now? You're just a has-been throwing a tantrum." The crowd booed, their loyalty shifting, sensing Jimmy's weakness. Ben's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm, lethal. "Keep talking, Jimmy. Every word you say just proves who you really are. A guy who'd rather tear down a friend than face his own emptiness." The accusation landed like a hammer, and the audience roared louder, their cheers for Ben drowning out Jimmy's faltering retorts. Producers scrambled at the stage's edge, one shouting into a headset, another waving for security, but the cameras stayed locked on the two men, capturing every second of the unraveling. Jimmy's face was flushed, his eyes darting to the crowd, searching for support that wasn't there. "You can't do this to me," he snarled, his voice hoarse, almost pleading. "This is my show. My rules." Ben shook his head, his voice steady but searing. "Not tonight, Jimmy. Tonight, the truth wins." He turned to the audience, his arms outstretched, his voice ringing with conviction. "This man betrayed me, used my lowest moment for a laugh. But I'm not ashamed of my past. It made me who I am, and I'm stronger than he'll ever be." The crowd exploded, their cheers deafening, a wave of support that seemed to lift Ben higher. Jimmy staggered back, his face pale, his hands gripping the desk for support. "You're done, Affleck," he muttered, but the words were weak, lost in the crowd's roar. Ben stepped closer, his voice a quiet blade. "No, Jimmy. You're done. You've been hiding behind that desk too long, thinking you're untouchable. But you're not." The audience was on its feet, their energy a tidal wave, as Ben stood tall, his anger now a controlled fire, ready to burn away Jimmy's lies once and for all. Ben Affleck stood like a pillar in the storm, his eyes locked on Jimmy Kimmel, who clung to his desk, his face a mask of crumbling defiance. The audience was a roaring sea, their cheers for Ben a thunderclap that shook the studio, their boos for Jimmy sharp and unrelenting. "You're not untouchable," Ben said, his voice steady, cutting through the noise like a beacon. "You thought you could break me down, turn my pain into your victory. But you're the one breaking, Jimmy. Look at you." The crowd roared louder, their support a tidal wave, lifting Ben as Jimmy's shoulders slumped, his eyes darting, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Jimmy's voice was a ragged whisper, his earlier venom drained. "You think you've won?" he muttered, his hands trembling, as he gripped the desk's edge. "You think this makes you better than me?" Ben stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his voice low but resonant. "I don't need to be better than you, Jimmy. I just need to be honest. I own my mistakes. I've fought my way back. You? You. Just prey on others to feel strong." The audience erupted, their applause a deafening wave, some shouting Ben's name, others hurling insults at Jimmy, who flinched as if struck. The producers, frantic at the stage's edge, signaled wildly, but the cameras stayed on, capturing the final unraveling of Jimmy's facade. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came, his face pale, his eyes hollow. Ben didn't let up, his voice rising, not with anger now, but with a fierce clarity. "I came here tonight to talk, to trust you again. But you showed everyone who you really are, a man who'd sell out a friend for a cheap laugh. I'm done with you, Jimmy. And so are they." He gestured to the audience, who leapt to their feet, their cheers a seismic force, their rejection of Jimmy absolute. Jimmy staggered back, his voice a weak croak. "Get out," he said, but it was barely audible, swallowed by the crowd's roar. Ben shook his head, his face calm now, a victor standing over a fallen foe. "I'm leaving, Jimmy, but not because you told me to, because I'm done wasting my time on someone who doesn't deserve it." He turned to the audience, his voice strong, unwavering. "Thank you for seeing the truth, for standing with me." The crowd exploded, their applause a wall of sound as Ben walked off the stage, his head high, his steps steady, a man reclaimed. Jimmy stood alone, the cameras still rolling, his face a portrait of defeat. The audience's cheers for Ben echoed as he disappeared into the wings, leaving Jimmy to face the silence of his own making. The producers rushed forward, one shouting to cut the feed, but it was too late. The world had seen it all. Ben's strength, Jimmy's betrayal, and the truth that rose above it. The crowd kept chanting Ben's name, their voices carrying long after he was gone, a testament to a man who'd faced his past and walked away unbroken, leaving Jimmy to choke on the ashes of his own ambition.